Joining us now live from the White House is Deputy Press Secretary to the President. We call him the Hogster, Hogan Gidley. Hogan, good to have you with us. You're with John, Nick, and Chris. Let's get right to the border and the chaos going on there right now. This crisis that the President has been talking about for months and months and months now finally even being acknowledged by President Obama's former Secretary of DHS, Jay Johnson, his former director of the Border Patrol, also now being acknowledged by Chris Cuomo on CNN of all people. And it's unbelievable. What is going on now down there?
Well, it's getting worse. The situation we've been saying was coming for a long time. The president has been explaining to people and taking his message directly to all Americans, whether it's in his State of the Union address, his Oval Office address, from the diplomat room, whatever it is. He's telling the American people this is coming, this is a problem. And for so long, Democrats just didn't want to hear it. As you know, the political calculus is such on their side, which is way far left on this, that open borders is their policy. You mentioned Green New Deal in the segment just before me, and of course a government socialist takeover of all your health care, making private insurance illegal, and of course killing babies after they're born. This is another situation in which they just are moving so far left here that their complete plan for this crisis is just make things that are illegal legal. And that's not tenable for anybody. But you pointed out, I think one of the biggest surprises of yesterday was Chris Cuomo down the border. And it's so funny to watch a journalist stumble into the truth when all they expected was to hear the narrative they wanted to hear and that they believed true without evidence. I remember when MSNBC was going through the tent cities trying to show everyone that a majority of the people there were women and children. Instead, what they discovered was, the reporter said, a majority were men coming into this country. That didn't fit their narrative. They cut away from that reporter. Here we are, the same situation where Chris Cuomo goes out and talks to somebody, and basically, to summarize, he asks one of the illegal immigrants, what are you doing here? And he expected to hear, oh my gosh, my country's so oppressive. I need a job. My family's struggling. He said, yeah, I need a job. That's what I'm here for. But if I need to say that I'm here for asylum, I will, just as long as I get to stay. And Chris Cuomo basically asked, well, why did you bring your son with you? And he said, because I know that if I bring my son, I was told if I bring my son, I'll get to stay. And he said, well, where did you hear that from? And he said, well, the cartels. The human traffickers, those people, they told me what to say. So, I mean, this is a coordinated effort that's been going on now for a long time. This president has the guts to stand up and say, we're fixing it, and we've got to fix it right now. Democrats still don't want to acknowledge it, for the most part, that it does exist. It's starting to break through a little bit. People are starting to see this. But the president needs a fix, and he needs one quickly. And if he doesn't get one via Congress, as you saw with the declaration of the national emergency, he'll do everything within his legal authority to protect this nation. And just yesterday, as I finished this long monologue from the Oval Office, the president said, listen, I understand this could hurt the economy. I made this economy great. What I've done here has sent this economy soaring like never before. But I also understand my priority is to protect the American people. I'm going to choose safety and security of them over trade every day of the week, because that's how important it is to the crisis we face on the southern border.
No question about it. You're on the John Fredericks Radio Network. We're live today in Richmond at the Virginia General Assembly. We're with myself, Hogan Gidley, who was the Deputy Press Secretary to the President of the United States, Chris Saxman, former House of Delegates member, and current House of Delegates member Nick Freitas ran for U.S. Senate. Nick, you ran for U.S. Senate. Had you been elected, you would be dealing with this now. Respond here to Hogan.
Oh, no, I think he's absolutely right. I think one of the biggest problems we have, and keep in mind, I still do work in national security. I used to actually design training programs, part of it dealing with how to handle drug cartels. And one of the things that we started seeing earlier on was that cartels were starting to actually take over the illegal immigration trade. And so they were using it to exploit people. They were using it to deceive people. They were using it to get guns and drugs into the country. And so it was a no-brainer that, of course, we need tighter border security. The other thing, too, that I think we need to point out here is that President Trump has actually come forward with a method to actually make the immigration process fairer, to make it less expensive, to make it easier for be able to immigrate into the United States, provided that you have the necessary skill sets and what you need in order to succeed in this country. And the Democrats have rejected it. And the reason they've rejected it, John, is because they benefit more from the problem than they do the solution. And that is why they have been completely intransigent. It's why they don't offer any of their own tenable solutions in order to deal with this problem. And so they have helped create this as a crisis because I believe they think they benefit politically from the crisis.
So from here, Hogan, I want you to respond to this and what Nick said. There's basically three major drivers here. There's the Flores Amendment. There's Dianne Feinstein's bill. And there's the fact that we have to now go back to catch and release because we 90% of the people that claim asylum are not when they do have a hearing, they're rejected. But then we can only have them for 20 days, so they're already released. How do we deal with changing those laws in the short term that are acting like a magnet?
Well, I'll get to that in one moment. I do want to point out, I think he's absolutely right in the sense that Democrats don't want to solve the problem. And when they say, oh, I don't like what Donald Trump's doing, no reporter says, what's your solution? Because two things. One is they either don't want to say that they have a solution because they don't, or two, their solution is open borders. Just make it all legal, and I think they don't want to be exposed there. That's one thing. But as we move on to the solutions here, the president's offered several, as you know. I mean, 3 Octobers ago, he put forth an 88-point plan describing what he wanted to do. We boiled it down to 4 bullet points with ending chain migration, visa lottery. You mentioned those yesterday from the Oval Office. But if we're dealing with the crisis right now, there are 3 things we can basically do to fix this immediately that Congress has to act on. One of those, you mentioned, we have to be able to return unaccompanied minors back to their families in the country of origin from which they came. So regardless of how they get here, regardless of why, it is imperative that we reunite them with their families, and we do it expeditiously, quickly as possible. And right now we can't do that. So we have to amend the TVPRA, the Trafficking Victims Protections Reauthorization Act. We have to amend that immediately. Congress can do that today. Second is, whenever we apprehend family units, by law, you cannot incarcerate a child with their parent for the time it takes them to get to court for more than 20 days. Well, that process usually takes a lot longer. What we want to do is amend the Flores Settlement Agreement, that's what it's called, to make sure that those children can stay with their parents until that parent actually goes to court. Because otherwise you're separating them, and then you have to release the child, and then we have the whole problem all over again. We want to be able to deport the family unit as a whole and keep them together during that process. And third, you touched on it, the asylum laws. So many who come here claim credible fear. That is a provision under the asylum law that basically says you're being persecuted from your government at home for various reasons. We need to strengthen those criteria because right now they're fairly weak. And you hit on it. As they have seen an increase in the credible fear claims, 1,700% in the last 8 years. They know exactly the buzzword to use when they get here because they're told it'll keep them in this country, and it has worked. But you guys mentioned it. We have to change that because so many of those people, upwards of 90%, don't make the threshold for credible fear in a court of law and have to be sent back. So we've got to do those 3 things. If Congress wants to act on one of them, all 3 of them, either way, what we're facing right now in the crisis situation deals predominantly with children. That would basically stop the immediate impending crisis, the disaster we have along the southern border almost instantaneously.
Nick?
Well, I think another thing too that we need to take into consideration here is that the sort of policies we're talking about, they're not anti-immigrant. When you have people that are trying to game the system and they come in and they claim asylum when they're not truly seeking asylum, they are overwhelming the system. So now that when you have actual asylum seekers, they're now 2,000 placed back in line, and they're not able to seek proper asylum. And so I think we need to appreciate that these sort of policies not only benefit American citizens, not only benefit American security, they also provide a safe and legal mechanism for people to be able to come into this country legally, whether it's through the regular immigration process or whether it's seeking asylum. But when we have a broken system that we do, and we have Democrats perpetuating that broken system, it not only hurts American citizens, it hurts people that want to legally immigrate to this country as well.
But that's exactly right, in the sense that 1.1 million people we allow into this country legally every year to become citizens. Now, that doesn't include the 500,000 we give for work visas, 500,000 for student visas. We're the most generous planet on the globe as it relates to immigration. But we want to do it the right way. And like you said, those who are legitimately seeking a dangerous regime in their home countries and have a credible fear of persecution and death deserve the right to be at the front of the line as opposed to being pushed to the back of the line by people who are gaming the system and lying about why they're coming here.
Which is funding the drug cartels.
Correct.
Exactly.
This is a drug cartel business.
It's a domino effect, right?
It's a drug cartel business.
It's
99% of the border crossings are directed and controlled by the drug cartels.
All right, let's get back to the hoaxer. Hogan, what about the president saying, look, I've got to do something. I'm going to just shut down the border to get everybody's attention. And, of course, you've got your typical establishment types on both sides screaming, well, the millennials aren't going to be able to buy an avocado or something. Address that, closing the border.
The avocado toast lobby is going to be really engaged on this one. Listen, the president wants to do everything within his legal authority to protect the American people. He doesn't want to shut down the southern border or close ports of entry, but he may be forced to do it if Congress doesn't act here. And he doesn't want to hurt the economy. Listen, we're seeing record-setting numbers in economic growth in this country because of the things the president has done. But he made it clear in the Oval Office yesterday that he's going to take the safety and security over the trade policies all day, every day, because the American people deserve that. There are many ways to close ports of entry. And I think one thing should be articulated to your listeners, and that is this. So much of what we're seeing now is because so many people cross between ports of entry, which, of course, the media refuses to acknowledge. They say that's fake and false, that they only come to ports of entry, which makes no sense at all. Of course, they're going to come in where there is no law enforcement. We're having to take resources and people away from those ports of entry and put them in the desert because that's where the influx of these people are coming, and it hurts our ports of entry. But the bottom line is the president's looking at every way to potentially protect the American people, and that does include closing those ports. It could be all of them. It could be one of them. It could be two of them. It could be strategically done within an individual port by changing, certain lanes and closing certain lanes and just focusing on the trade traffic as opposed to pedestrian traffic. There are all types of things that are at his disposal here, and we're looking at all those ways. Everything is on the table. He obviously hasn't made a decision yet, but it should be noted, after the president made this claim, we've been dealing with the Mexican government, too, and they've been working with us on coming up with solutions, more so than the Democrats, quite frankly. But they're holding people longer. They're allowing us to keep them there as they make asylum claims as opposed to coming into this country. They're working on sealing up their borders from the south as well. So we're getting reports the Mexican government is doing more for us, and that's good. That's really good. But until it actually solves the problem, and we do it from our side with congressional action, the president's been clear that everything is on the table.
Hogan, what about the president's jawboning to the leaders of Mexico, Honduras, Colombia, other South American countries? Because right now we understand, or we've heard, that the Honduras government is actually encouraging a particular sector of their people to come to the United States, saying that, look, now's the time to go now. The borders are overwhelmed. You're going to get in. What, outside of cutting aid, what other actions is the president taking to get these countries to cooperate with us? Mexico
well, look,
included.
We have good relationships with those leaders. I mean, I think the head of the Honduran government made that point the other day, that he doesn't like the potential, but he does appreciate the relationship we have with each other. But listen, we've given Guatemala upwards of $257 million, I think, a fiscal year or two ago, 296 in this past budget, $296 million. So we're sending our money there, but yet they're sending their people here. That obviously is a problem, and the president's been clear that we've got to clean that kind of stuff up. But that's where the Mexican government comes into play as well. And if the folks in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador won't work to clean it, then we're going to have to do what we can to protect our people from that. And I think that's been obvious because the president's now talking about, he pulled funding from those countries, and that's something that, a lot of politicians have promised. We don't like the way they're acting, so we may pull their funding. Again, this is another place where the president, is keeping a promise made that, listen, why are we giving all this money to these countries who don't have our interests at heart and, quite frankly, the interests of their own people at heart? So he's protecting us. He's protecting them in the process, and we've got to shore all this up. And so the president's doing what he can in this country to protect us and, quite frankly, protect those people from making a horrifically dangerous journey northward. We've seen the horror stories. We've heard about them. The pictures and video are just so sad and so gut-wrenching. We want to prevent those journeys and those separations from happening, and we can do that just by simply changing or tweaking a couple of laws we already have on the books. Congress just has to act on it.
Okay, final question. We're almost out of time. We're with Hogan Gidley. Hogan is the Deputy Secretary at the White House Live for the President of the United States, President Trump. Hogan, DHS Secretary Nielsen has said, look, one of the biggest issues here is we have to be able to, when people claim asylum, those have to be adjudicated in Mexico, not in the United States, because once they cross the border, all the things that we mentioned, basically they have free reign. There's laws that protect them. How does that happen? That sounds like a common sense solution that she has. How do we get that done?
I'm sorry. Repeat the last part of that question. I missed it. You said that she had done.
She says that that the people that are claiming asylum, most of them, as we know, are fraudulent claims. They don't have
Correct.
standing for it. But she says when they claim asylum, they have to be held in Mexico, not in the United States. She said that's really the key to making this work, is
True.
They have to be in Mexico. How do we make that happen?
Well, it is happening. That's what's so great. Secretary Nielsen and the president worked out a deal with Mexico in this sense that when anyone claims asylum in this country, when they get to the southern border, the Mexican government said it would allow them to stay in Mexico. What we're seeing, though, obviously, is a strain on the Mexican economy as well when that happens, because so many people are coming up and they're having to stay in Mexico. But that's the point. It's a strain on us. Let's work together to try and fix this problem. And as you mentioned, so many of those asylum claims are proven to be fake and phony, false. And so we've got to make sure that those who actually have credible fear, get into this country. We're fine with that. We want to protect those people. We want to be welcoming. But it's the ones who try to game the system that we have to figure out how to handle in a better manner. That's why the congressional fix would actually serve as a deterrent to all the things you're mentioning now, these asylum claims. If you tighten up the asylum laws, if you fix TVPRA, if you fix Flores settlement, all of those things work in tandem to act as a major deterrent to keep people from making that perilous journey, because they know when they get here they're going to be turned away. And that's a much different disincentive than the Democrats, whose solution is just open it all up. We don't care if the child gets here. We don't, and that's what's so ridiculous. Once they get here, if the parents claim asylum, if the children come here unaccompanied, our solution is let's work to figure out how we send them back to their families in the country of origin. Let's work to figure out how we send the kids, whether they're 10 or 2, back to those families. If they're adults and they're gaming the system, we can't reward them with citizenship. Where the Democrats see it and go, wait, they came all the way here. Well, now we've got to let them in. We have to do all these things, pay for everything in their lives because they came here. That's just an untenable situation, and you're seeing the ramifications of that now, and this president wants to fix it, and quite frankly, he's going to.
Hogan, we're out of time. I want to thank Hogan Gidley for being with us, Deputy Press Secretary to President Trump, live at the White House. Hogan, thanks for being with us, man. Always appreciate
Thanks. Y'all have a great day.